Here, of course, are the terms for this lecture on military developments between 1500 and 1750. By the end of this presentation, you should understand the military revolution thesis, the emergence of cannon, the artillery fortress, and how these two developments helped monarchs in Europe to reassert their control over the powerful medieval lords and indeed end the medieval era and introduce what we call the early modern European era. And finally, the infantry revival and linear tactics, how and why they came about. Now, historians in the 1950s began to notice this increase in military manpower between 1470 and 1710. And if you look at just the armies in France, the central column there, you'll see that in the 1470s we estimate that the military power in France consists of about 40,000 men. By the 1700s, we're talking about 400,000 men. The question is, well, what drove this tremendous change? Well, what we think is what happened is something called the military revolution. The military revolution thesis originated in the 1950s with a guy named Michael Roberts, but in its present form, it is the brainchild of Jeffrey Parker, who is actually right here at the Ohio State University. This is a photo taken of him a few years ago, but he's still a very, very handsome man. And here is the thesis as Jeffrey revised it. First, he says that a series of innovations in the nature of warfare on land and sea in Western Europe between 1430 and 1630 combined to create a new way of war. Says that the combined impact of these innovations far exceeded the sum of the parts. They interacted with and responded to outside stimuli, socially, politically, and in terms of economic growth, intellectual evolution, and environmental change. Almost all of the innovations of this military revolution had medieval antecedents and non-European parallels, but the scale of the changes in Western Europe between 1430 and 1630 were unique. No other period of history before the Industrial Revolution witnessed a similar spate of such rapid technological innovations on both land and sea, accompanied by such profound intellectual, social, political, and economic transformations. The military revolution produced asymmetrical conflicts, that is to say, conflicts in which one side possessed an unanswerable advantage over the other within Europe, but the asymmetry extended far beyond Europe and far longer because the European powers, which had undergone the military revolution transformation, came to prevail over their enemies elsewhere in the world. So that by the late 1770s, European powers controlled about 35% of the Earth's surface, and by 1914 would control about 80% of the Earth's surface. The conclusion to all this is that by 1775, the military revolution and the transformations that it put in motion allowed relatively small groups of Europeans to achieve domination of, as I said, 1/3 of the Earth's surface. How did this come about? Everybody thinks that it had to do with the introduction of gunpowder to Europe and the emergence of cannon. This occurs in the 15th century, and you see its use in the closing battles of the 100 Years' War. And the emergence of cannon meant that medieval castles with their high vertical walls were obsolete. And what you get the emergence of instead are these star-shaped fortresses that we'll call the artillery fortress. And you'll notice that this artillery fortress is star-shaped and it surrounds an entire city called Palmanova. It's in Italy. And the idea here is that to defend against cannon, the only powers, the only people in Europe, the only nobility in Europe that could generate enough wealth to create these artillery fortresses were by and large monarchs. And what this meant was the end of the considerable independence that powerful medieval lords enjoyed during the Middle Ages. and a reassertion of control over all of their territory, effective control over all of their territory by European monarchs. Now, what are we looking at here? Well, what we're looking at actually is a fortress that is designed to be a low profile and to afford as little of a target for cannon as possible. And so, if you were to look at this artillery fortress, looking straight on from a distance, you would see very little of the walls. If infantry tried to attack these walls, though, they would discover that below ground level had been dug these dry moats that made the walls still a considerable obstacle to an infantry attack. And the star shape was designed to be such that it created areas of crossfire that the fortress could place under crossfire any infantry attack. So all in all, we're looking at a very powerful new development. And again, really, it was only European monarchs that could afford to create them, and create them they did. These artillery fortresses soon dotted all of Europe by the 1600s. Now, at the same time that you have the emergence of the artillery fortress, you also see an infantry revival. During the medieval period, it was cavalry in the form of the heavy cavalrymen, the knight, that dominated European battlefields, and the infantry, the phalanx organization had gone out of existence really since the end of the Roman Empire. But it reemerges during this period, first in the form of pikemen. You can see them here repelling enemy cavalry, and then subsequently with the emergence of the musketeer using the smoothbore musket. And armies utilizing infantry came under the control of the monarchs. They're called the new monarchs as well. And these monarchs, beginning with France, developed the bureaucratic and administrative capacity to extract wealth from within their kingdoms, and then apply that wealth to their armed forces, so that by 1700, European monarchs had professional armies that they could reliably control and they could deploy as they wanted to. These new armies employed linear tactics, very much like the phalanx of the ancient period, the classical Greeks and the Romans. If you're looking down at this map, the Battle of Breitenfeld, this was fought in the 30 Years' War, you can get some idea of what these new armies looked like on the battlefield. And this is how they looked in 1631. This would be how they looked in 1750. This would be how they looked during the American Civil War. To back up a little bit, this is how they looked during the Napoleonic era. This is the way that they looked all the way up to the beginning of the First World War. Now, what I want you to do next is to look at this about a 3-minute excerpt from the film Barry Lyndon that shows you what these linear tactics were like in operation.